Hi loves, it's My Daily Threads. We're here with another great tutorial for the flounce skirt. Let's go ahead and talk about a few things you'll need. Your clear ruler, pattern paper, L square, a French curve, paper scissors, pen and pencils, measuring tape, a few stick pins, your tracing wheel, notcher, and a yardstick if you don't have the other types of rulers. Once you've gathered what you need, you'll have to take a few measurements, starting with your waist measurement, then your waist down to your hip measurement, your full hip measurement, waist down to about 2 inches above the knee, then take your measuring tape with your legs spread slightly apart, wrapping it around 2 inches above the knee, take that measurement. Once you've taken your measurements, you'll have to do a little math. So you'll take your waist measurement, divide that by 4. Your hip measurement, divide that by 4. Take the circumference around both of your legs with your legs slightly apart, divide that number by 4. For the flounce, you'll do the same thing. Take the circumference around both legs again and divide that number by 6.28. Once you've done all of those measurements, you want to make sure that you jot them down close so you'll know exactly what to mark on your pattern paper for the steps. Okay, loves, let's talk a little bit about negative ease. Now, this skirt was drafted specifically for the use of knit fabrics. Negative ease is a principle applied to garments when using knit or stretch fabrics, okay? A negative ease garment is always going to measure smaller than your actual body measurements, okay? So, because this pattern was drafted with the use of knits in mind, I know I'm going to have to take away from my actual body measurement. So when I draft the skirt for myself, I eliminated the side seam allowance, okay? So I didn't add seam allowance to the garment. But I also knew what type of fabric I was going to be using, which is a scuba that has great give, but it's still very firm. Now, how you apply negative ease principles to your pattern and your garment is always going to be based on the type of knit fabric that you're using. Some knit fabrics will require more negative ease, and some knit fabrics will require less negative ease. So it really depends on what type of knit fabric you're going to be using in order to determine how much negative ease to apply to the skirt. Which is why I am not going to tell you a specific number to take away in order to draft your pattern. Okay, that's something that you have to determine based on the type of knit that you're using. But if you look at this slide and read through this slide, you'll see exactly what I did to apply that principle to my skirt. If you are a newbie and you've never done anything like this before, what I would suggest is simply draft the pattern as you see me do it and add seam allowance all the way around except for the center front, of course. And then sew the side seams of your skirt up, okay? Turn the skirt on inside out, try it on, and then take it in where you need to get that fit that you want until you become more comfortable with applying negative ease principles, and you're determining that based on the type of knit fabric that you use. So again, if you've never done this before, simply sew your side seams of your skirt and fit the skirt before adding the flounce. For those of you who are fabulously great at patterns and drafting and all of that, you don't have to worry about it. Go ahead and just add the negative ease as you know you would, or look at this slide and determine whether or not you want to follow these steps. But for now, we're going to go ahead and move on to the demo portion of the video. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you're going to want to grab a piece of paper, your pattern paper, and you want to cut a big square. And you want to make sure it's at least 4 to 5 inches longer and wider than your actual measurements. Once you do that, take your L square and square off a line that's going to be longer than your skirt measurement and wider than your widest part of your skirt measurement. So as you see here, I have a piece of paper and a squared off line. Now what I'm doing is, from the top of the squared off line, I'm going to drop down 1 inch and make a dot. The reason I'm dropping down is because you're going to need that seam allowance at the top for the top part of your skirt. Once I make that dot, I drop down and make another dot, and that is the indicator of where my waist down to the hip measurement is. Okay, so that would have been 7 inches for me. Then I'm taking the ruler from the waist down to the length of my skirt and making another dot, and that last dot is going to be the indicator of the length of my skirt. So you see I'm marking waist, and then I'm marking hip, and then I'm marking an L for the length of my skirt. Okay, so waist, hip, length mark. Now remember, we took all of those measurements in the beginning. Okay, so now I'm going to take my clear ruler, make sure it is flush with my squared off line, and I'm going to extend from the mark that I made for the waist mark. I'm going to extend out that number for my waistline. Okay, so whatever your number was when you took your waist measurement and divided it by 4, you're going to extend your line out that measurement. Then you're going to drop down, because from my waist to my hip was another measurement that we took. That was, I believe, the second measurement we took. Now I'm going to extend that out to my hip measurement divided by 4. So whatever my hip measurement was, I divided it by 4, then I extended a line here for that measurement. And then lastly, on the length mark, I'm going to extend. Now this is where I took the measuring tape around my legs, 2 inches above my knee, and I did the whole circumference of both of my legs. I'm extending that out, okay? So that number, I actually divided by 4 as well. So for me, it would have been 28, I believe, divided by 4, okay? Now, what we do here is take the French curve, and we're going to start connecting these lines together. So now I'm going to connect my waist to my hip line. Now remember, you don't want to do a straight line, because normally you're not just straight up and down. Okay, so you want to make sure you kind of have a little curve in there, just as you would see with the commercial pattern skirt. There's going to be a little curve in there. Then I'm going to connect my hip down to my hemline. So from my hip down to my hemline. Okay, so because you see there's a little point there, well, your hip doesn't really do that, okay? So what you're going to want to do is take your French curve, and now what I'm doing is correcting where that little point is. So you kind of just take it and you move it around until you get it in a place where you say, yeah, that's pretty good curve right there, and you kind of smooth that point out. You're basically eliminating that point. So as you can see, I have one line on the inside and one on the outside where that point is. Where I'm going to cross out that point, getting rid of that. My hip is not shaped that way. There's more of a curve there. So now I've created a new hip line with my French curve. Looks more natural this way. Okay? So now I'm going to take my pen, I'm going to draw that in so you guys can see it a little better. Here, I'm going and I'm correcting that line again. And then we're going to connect again here. And you're going to have to use your curve to kind of get it right. And you're going to have to move it. It's not just a straight shot, because it's not just a straight shot down on your body. So you kind of have to take that French curve and kind of manipulate it in there and get it to be the shape that you want it to be, because that's going to be how you actually cut out your fabric. Okay, and as you can see here again, I'm just kind of scratching off that part that doesn't matter anymore. And I can do that because I'm using a knit fabric, okay? So I can get rid of that because I want it to hug my body anyway, okay? Now normally here, we would take this clear ruler and go around and mark seam allowance all the way around. But remember, I don't want the seam allowance because I'm going to be using this neoprene knit. And as you can see, there is a lot of give there, a lot of stretch. So I already know in order to get the fit that I want, I'm definitely going to have to use some negative ease there. All right. I mean, it gives a lot. And the way that I want my skirt to fit, I know there's going to be negative ease. Thus, I am not going to add seam allowance to my side seams as discussed earlier. I am, however, going to add 5/8 to the bottom of my skirt for hem allowance. And I'm going to smooth that out, making it flush with my side seam. And that does mean that I may have to make a little correction. As you can see there, there's a little correction line there. Then I'm going to add enough of a waistband at the top. You could add a waistband should you choose, or you can just roll over and do an elastic waist, which is what I did. It was just quick and easy. And because I had a couple of these skirts to make, I decided, you know what, let's do it this way with the elastic. We don't need a zipper or anything else because the neoprene gives so much. It just isn't needed. So now I'm just going to go ahead and connect that little roll part that I'm going to use to encase my elastic. Okay. And that really is it, guys. So we have all of that in and corrected. We have our hem allowance down at the bottom and enough for the roll at the top. Now, say you were doing this on the fold. What you could do is just make sure you trace out the skirt. Okay, so where we have the squared off center front line, that would basically be on the fold of the paper. And at this point, you would take your tracing wheel and trace out the important marks all around your skirt, which is your waist, your hip, your hem line, your seam allowance for the bottom hem, the seam allowance for the top of the waistband. And then you want to make sure, like I'm doing right here, right now, what you see there is I'm tracing out the center front. Okay, now if it was on the fold, you really wouldn't have to trace out the center front. Okay, now I'm tracing out the side seam. All right, and what you would do is when you open the paper up, you would be able to still see your markings on the other side of the paper. But since I didn't cut this, make my pattern on the fold, then I'm just cutting the pattern out. The good thing about cutting your pattern on the folds would be if you have a specific type of print and you want to be really strategic about where that print is placed on your skirt pattern. Okay, so that's a great reason to cut your pattern on the fold. Okay, so now we're just cutting down the center front because again, my pattern isn't cut on the fold. Just cutting away all of the excess paper and getting rid of that. Okay, now here's where your notcher comes into play. And if you don't have a notcher, it's fine, no worries. Just use your scissors or your ink pen and just mark where your things are with a little arrow. I have a notcher, so I try and make myself use it often, even when I'm doing little quick projects like this. Okay, So I'll show you what the notcher markings kind of look like when you have a notcher. You just see those little marks right there. Yeah. And it just basically lets you know where the important areas are on your pattern. Okay? So that's pretty much what notching is all for. You're just letting yourself know where your important marks are on your pattern. Now, if we were doing this and transferring this to our hard copy and doing more of a truing process, you definitely would want to keep your notcher handy. Now we mark the center front and center back fold. So we'll let ourselves know that you're just cutting the same piece for the front and the back, but you're making sure that you're cutting it on the fold. Okay, guys, as you can see, it's all done. We are good to go. Okay, loves, now let's go ahead and get started with the flounce portion of the video. So now what you want to do is you want to grab a big square piece of paper, another big square piece, okay? You want to make sure that it's wide enough and long enough for your flounce to be drafted in between the squared off line, okay? If it's not long enough or wide enough, you're going to end up having to extend it and stop and start again, right? So what you want to do is, again, make sure it's long enough and it's wide enough. Once you've done that, grab your tape measure, okay, and a stick pin, all right? So you want to just take this stick pin and stick it into the soft part right up under the little tip of the tape measure. Usually every tape measure has that little metal part at the top. You want to stick it right under there. And then you want to take the top of the metal portion of the tape measure and match it up right at the corner, right where at the tip of that corner of your squared off line is. And press your pin in. So underneath my paper I have a piece of cardboard and I just press the pin in there, okay? What this is doing is just something really quick and simple. It's kind of like creating your own little protractor so that you can accurately mark your circle, your half circle flounce on the paper. So that's basically what this is, okay? Just a little trick I do and thought I'd go ahead and share. Now you want to either take a pencil, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to be doing it in pen. Okay, some may want to start with a pencil. In case you mess up, you can erase it. But for the video, I need you to be able to see what I'm doing, so I'm going to start with a pen. Now, where you see me pointing and moving the protractor, I am dropping down from the top corner of that line how long I need to drop down for the circumference of my half circle. So remember when I told you to take the tape measure and wrap it around your legs and whatever that measurement was to divide it by 6.28? All right, that's the number that we're applying here. So for me, that came out to 4.5. So I dropped down from the top corner 4.5 inches, and now you see me creating a little half circle on the paper using 4.5 inches, okay? And you go all the way around. Now I say this is a half circle because actually you're going to cut this on the fold, all right? Which would be, once you unfold it, it will be a half circle, okay? So what you see me doing now is going on and connecting my dots that I made using my little makeshift protractor. Okay, now I just eyeball it. If you want to make sure that you have it perfect, you can use your French curve or any curve that you have, and you shouldn't have a problem. But I've done it so much, I can just kind of eyeball it. Okay, now the next thing you're going to do is you're going to mark the length of your flounce. Now you don't want to start at the tip. You see where I have my finger pointing, those two right there? I want to make sure that I start my measurement for how long I want my flounce at where I started making my half circle notch, okay? So now I'm going down from there, not from the top of the squared off line, but right where I started making my first half circle. Now we're going to create another half circle, okay? For the length, all right? Now I marked on my little tape measure exactly where that length should show up. And now I'm just going to continue to go on just like I did at the top half circle and go all the way around. And this is the actual bottom portion of your flounce. So it's basically where your hem of your flounce would be. I used a great scuba that doesn't fray, cuts evenly, perfectly. So guess what? I didn't have to hem my flounce. If you're using another type of knit, you may have to hem your flounce. So this line is actually your hem line. Now, you see me adjusting the pin up at the top. Make sure you push it in there really good. I don't think I had it in there quite so great, which is why I had to keep adjusting it. But I didn't want to stop filming, so we just go ahead. You kind of get the gist of it, though. So just continue on, keep going around, and keep going around all the way until you've created another half circle. But make sure your tape measure straight. It's not gathering up or bunching up. Otherwise, you're going to have a crooked hem or a crooked bottom half of your flounce. Okay? You don't want that. All right? And then I'm just going to do that. Now, remember, I didn't add seam allowance to my skirt because I was doing ease. So guess what? I'm not going to add it to the flounce because I want the side seams of my flounce to match the side seams of my skirt. And in order to do that, that means I didn't add seam allowance. For those of you who are adding seam allowance because you're really not sure about your negative ease, you go ahead and add it to the side seam. Okay? Now the side seam of this flounce would be right where you see that pattern weight. Okay? To the right of your screen. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and cut out the flounce. Now, no worries that I didn't fill in the bottom line. It's not a big deal. Like I said again, I've done this so much, I can just kind of eyeball where my dots are and I know where I'm going and what direction I'm going. But for those of you who want to get a more perfect hem or perfect half circle, just grab your French curve and just kind of work it all the way around and make sure that you stay right where your dots are so that you have an even hem line. Okay, definitely want to do that. All right. Continuing to cut away here. Now, the line that I'm cutting now, that is my side seam. That is where you would add your seam allowance. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the excess paper. We're going to open this up, and I'm going to throw a few pattern weights on here to keep it down so that you can see it as I go along because it keeps rolling on me. So, let's go ahead, and now, this is the center front, center back. You're going to cut 2 of these flounce pieces, by the way. So your center front piece and your center back piece are exactly the same as they were on your skirt pattern. Okay, so side seam, and the other portion is your center front, center back fold. And so that's what I'm marking here. Center front and center back on the fold. Okay, make sure you do that so you kind of know what part is which. And over here, I'm going to mark side seam. Okay. And put a little box around center front, center back on the fold. Okay? And let's go ahead and turn this around for you so you can kind of see side seam here. You want to make sure I didn't add any seam allowance. That's why I'm telling you no, because there's no seam allowance. And your center front, center back, of course it's on the fold, so you definitely don't want any seam allowance there. Right? And you're going to cut 2 pieces of this. Okay? Alright. Now you can also do a high-low flounce if you wanted to, and which means that you would get lower at the side seam. So you would start off where you are at the center front, center back fold, and then you would get longer and longer as you make your way to the side seam. So that's another idea if you're thinking about doing a different type of fitted flounce skirt. And you see, those are the 2 pieces. I'm going to mark on here, as I should have from the beginning. Cut 2 pieces of this. One for your front and one for your back. And loves, that is it. We are all done. Thanks for tuning in, loves. Be sure to follow me on the following social media outlets.